Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been working retail for about 5 years by then. Started as a regular sales associate when I was 19, worked my way up through the ranks. By May 2020, I was a department supervisor at one of those massive homeware stores where you can buy everything from bedding to groceries. The kind of place that gets absolutely crazy busy on weekends. I'd been promoted to supervisor about 8 months earlier, and honestly, I loved the job despite all the chaos. My team was great, mostly young people just starting out in retail, and I always made sure to have their backs. That's just who I am. My friends always joke that I'm usually pretty laid back, but there are exactly two things that will set me off: disrespecting my family and messing with my team members. Those kids work hard, and they don't deserve to be treated like garbage by entitled customers. The lockdown restrictions had just started easing up a bit, but we still had strict rules about how many people could be in the store at once. Maximum capacity was being enforced everywhere, and our store was no exception. We had team members stationed at the entrance with counters, keeping track of who went in and out. When we hit our limit, people had to wait in a queue outside until someone left. It was a Saturday in early May, and the weather was decent for the first time in weeks. Everyone and their grandmother decided they needed to go shopping that day. By mid-afternoon, we were absolutely slammed. The queue outside was sneaking around the entrance, and people were getting restless. I was in the back dealing with a delivery when my radio crackled to life. Someone called all supervisors to the front entrance immediately because there was a situation developing. I dropped what I was doing and hurried toward the front of the store. Even from halfway across the shop floor, I could hear someone shouting. When I got closer, the shouting got louder and more aggressive. By the time I reached the customer service desk near the entrance, I could see what was happening. There was this woman, probably in her 40s, well dressed, the kind who clearly thought she was better than everyone else, absolutely losing it on one of my team members. The team member was this sweet 18-year-old girl who'd only been with us for a few months. She was standing there trying to explain the queue system while this woman just screamed at her. I walked over to the customer service desk first to get the full picture. I asked what was going on, and the rep explained that this woman had been trying to push past the queue for the last 10 minutes. She kept saying she didn't need to wait like everyone else and demanding to be let in immediately. When they explained about the maximum capacity, she just started yelling at everyone. I could see my team member at the entrance looking overwhelmed and upset. The woman was still going at her, waving her arms around and making a scene. I walked over and tried to get her attention, introducing myself as a supervisor and asking what the issue was. She completely ignored me and kept berating my team member. I had to actually raise my voice to get her to acknowledge I was there. I told her I was the supervisor and asked what the problem was. Finally, she turned to me and she was angry. She complained that it was about time someone with authority showed up. She said the girl was refusing to let her into the store, and she had important shopping to do. She didn't have time to stand in some ridiculous queue with all these people. I explained that I understood she was frustrated, but we had capacity restrictions right now. Everyone needed to wait in the queue until there was space inside. It was for everyone's safety. She called it nonsense and said she could see there was plenty of room inside. She demanded that I just let her in. I looked back at the store entrance. The queue was still blocking the pathway, and we were definitely at capacity. There was no way I could let her in even if I wanted to. I apologized but told her I couldn't do that. The queue was blocking the entrance, and we weren't allowed to let anyone in when it wasn't safe to do so. That's when she really lost it. She started calling my team member every horrible name you can think of. The poor girl's eyes started welling up with tears. She was just a kid doing her job, and this woman was being absolutely vicious. That was my breaking point. Nobody makes one of my team members cry on my watch. I shouted that I'd had enough and told her to back away from my store right now. I said she wasn't coming in here today or any other day with that attitude. She started screaming that I couldn't refuse her service and that it was discrimination. She accused us of being racist and said it was because she wasn't white. She started waving this card around, claiming she was a doctor and deserved special treatment. She said she was a general practitioner and an essential worker, so she had every right to skip the queue. I told her I didn't care what her job was. The way she was treating my staff was completely unacceptable and she needed to leave now. The shouting had gotten loud enough that the shopping center security guards came over to see what was happening. I quickly explained the situation to them, and they told the woman she was going to need to leave the shopping center. They said she was being refused entry and causing a disturbance. She declared that she wasn't going anywhere and that this was outrageous. Right then, a police van happened to be driving by on their regular patrol. They saw the commotion and stopped to check what was going on. I explained everything to the officers while the woman continued her tantrum. The police officer told her she had two choices. She could leave voluntarily, or they could arrest her for causing a public disturbance. She tried the same routine with the police that she'd tried with me, claiming discrimination and saying she was a doctor. She said they couldn't treat her like this. They weren't having any of it. The officer gave her a last warning to leave now or be arrested. She refused to move and called it harassment. The officer sighed and pulled out his handcuffs. He told her she was under arrest for public order offense and read her rights. When they were walking her toward the police van, she actually had the nerve to kick one of the officers. That just made everything 10 times worse for her. The whole shopping center watched when she got loaded into the police van, still shouting about discrimination and her rights as a doctor. A few days later, I got a call from our head office. Apparently, she had filed a complaint claiming that she was just waiting patiently in line when I randomly decided to have her arrested. I told them exactly what happened and mentioned that there was a police report documenting everything. The head office representative told me I had absolutely done the right thing. They said they were issuing a company-wide ban for this customer, so she wouldn't be shopping at any of our stores again. But the story gets even better. About a week later, one of the police officers who was there that day stopped by the store during his break. He told me that the woman had lost her job when a general practitioner because of the incident. Apparently, assaulting a police officer and the public order offense were serious enough that her medical practice let her go. My 18-year-old team member was so grateful that I stood up for her. Her parents even came in later to thank me personally. This happened about 6 years ago when I was working night shift at a small manufacturing plant. I had this beat-up old Honda that was on its last legs, but I couldn't afford anything better at the time. The thing was falling apart piece by piece, and I was constantly having to jury-rig something just to keep it running. The week before this incident, I was rushing to get to work and my heavy winter coat got caught on the turn signal lever when I was getting out of the car. I heard this awful snap, and when I looked back, the entire knob had broken clean off. Just my luck, right? But here's the thing about older cars. The turn signal and headlight controls are often connected. So when that knob broke off, I lost the ability to turn on my headlights normally. Being broke and needing the car to get to work every day, I had to get creative. I found an old pair of needle nose pliers in my toolbox and discovered I could jam them into the steering column where the broken knob used to be. If I twisted them just right, I could manually engage the headlights. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. For about a week, this was my routine. Every evening when I left work, I'd have to lean halfway out of my car door and fiddle with those pliers to get the lights on before driving home. The guys at work thought it was hilarious and kept telling me to just get it fixed. But money was tight, and I figured I could make it work until payday. That night, I was having more trouble than usual getting the headlights to engage. I was practically hanging out of the driver's side door, my upper body stretched across the seat, jamming these pliers into the steering column and twisting them every which way. I must have looked ridiculous, but finally I felt that familiar click and saw the headlight beams illuminate the road ahead. Right when I got the lights working, a police cruiser drove past me on the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Cops patrol that area all the time since it's near the industrial district. But when the cruiser rounded the corner and disappeared from view, I noticed the reflection of red and blue flashing lights bouncing off the trees down the road. Still not connecting the dots, I pulled myself back into the car, buckled my seatbelt, and shut the door. I was just sitting there for a moment, checking my mirrors and getting ready to head home, when I saw the same police car come flying back in the opposite direction at what had to be twice the speed limit. I pulled out of my parking spot and started driving toward home. That's when I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the cop car slam on its brakes hard enough that I could see the nose dive down from the sudden stop. The officer pulled a perfect U-turn and started following me. By this point, I was getting a little nervous, but I still hadn't figured out what was going on. I needed gas anyway, so I decided to pull into the station just a few doors down from where I worked. Maybe the cop would just drive past and leave me alone. No such luck. When I got out of my car, the police cruiser came screaming into the parking lot and locked up the brakes right behind me, blocking me in completely. The officer sat in his car for a moment with the window down, just staring at me with this suspicious squint. Finally, he rolled down his window and called out to me. He asked if I worked at the gas station, but there was something in his tone that made it sound like he had already made up his mind about something. His voice carried that mix of suspicion and uncertainty that cops get when they think they've caught someone but aren't quite sure. I was completely confused at this point. I told him I didn't work at the gas station and asked what was going on. I could see him looking me up and down, taking in my khaki pants and red polo shirt. The officer stared at me for another long moment, then looked through the gas station window. I followed his gaze and saw the cashier inside wearing almost the exact same outfit like me, khaki pants and a red polo shirt, except his didn't have the company logo that mine did. Something seemed to click for the officer. His whole demeanor changed from suspicious to embarrassed in about 2 seconds. He muttered something about never mind and started backing his car up without another word of explanation. And just like that, he drove away, leaving me standing there completely baffled by what had just happened. It wasn't until I walked into the gas station that it all clicked. The cashier behind the counter was wearing khakis and a red polo shirt that looked almost identical to mine. When the officer saw me hanging out of my car, apparently trying to hotwire it or break into it, he assumed I was stealing the vehicle. But when he got a good look at my clothes and saw that I was dressed exactly like the gas station employee, he figured no car thief would be stupid enough to steal a car just to drive to work. The cashier noticed my confused expression and asked if everything was okay. He said the cop had seemed pretty intense. I explained the whole situation to him, how the officer had apparently thought I was stealing my own car, but when he saw my outfit, he assumed I worked at the gas station and decided I must be legitimate. The cashier started laughing and said it was hilarious that I almost got arrested for car theft, but was saved because I accidentally matched his uniform. He found it funny that I didn't actually work there, but looking like I did had kept me out of handcuffs. The whole thing was so absurd I had to laugh along with him. Here I was, saved from a potential arrest not because I could prove the car was mine, but because my work clothes happened to match what the gas station employee was wearing. The officer made a snap judgment that no criminal would dress like they belonged at the scene of the crime. I bought my gas and drove home, making sure to keep both hands visible on the steering wheel the whole way. The next day, I scraped together enough money to get that turn signal fixed. Some money-saving tricks just aren't worth the hassle. Being a personal auto insurance liability adjuster for about 5 years means I investigate car accidents and figure out who's at fault, plus what coverage people actually have. People think they understand insurance way better than they actually do. They try to game the system all the time, especially when it comes to adding drivers to their policies. Parents are the worst offenders. They'll do anything to avoid putting their teenage or young adult kids on their insurance because it makes their rates shoot through the roof. Then when something goes wrong, they act shocked that we won't cover the claim. I see this kind of thing at least once a week. Parents will swear up and down that their kid doesn't live with them anymore, or that they barely drive, or that they have their own insurance somewhere else. Most of the time it's pretty obvious what's going on, but you have to follow the process and get all the facts before you can make any decisions. This case started like any other Tuesday morning. I got assigned a claim where some college kid had rear-ended another car at a traffic light. Nothing too serious, just some bumper damage, and a fender bender. But when I pulled up the policy, I noticed something right away. The kid who was driving wasn't listed anywhere on his mother's insurance policy. The car was registered to his mom, insured by his mom, but the driver wasn't covered. That's usually a pretty clear-cut denial right there, but I always have to do my due diligence and call to get the full story. You never know when there might be some legitimate reason why someone isn't listed. I dialed the number and got the mom on the phone. Right from the start, I could tell she was going to be difficult. She had that tone in her voice. You know the one. Like she was already annoyed that she had to explain herself to some lowly insurance worker who obviously didn't understand how things really worked. I started by explaining that I was calling about the accident involving her vehicle and that I needed to ask some questions about the driver. She got defensive right away and insisted that it was clearly the other person's fault because they stopped too suddenly. I told her that the driver of her vehicle wasn't listed on her policy and asked her to explain why. She said it was because he didn't live there anymore since he was away at college. When I asked if he was away all year, she said no, just most of it, and that his college was out of state. I was already getting a picture of what was happening here, but I needed to get all the details down properly. This was going to be one of those calls where every word mattered. I asked whether he lived in the dorms or off campus, and she said dorms. Then I asked where his driver's license said he lived, and she admitted it was still her address. I explained that he still needed to be on her policy. She got really condescending at that point and told me I was wrong. She insisted that since he lived in the dorms for most of the year, he wasn't at her address for most of the year, so he didn't need to be on the policy. There it was, the classic argument. I'd heard this exact same logic probably 100 times before, but something about the way she said it, so condescending and sure of herself, made me want to dig a little deeper. I pointed out that when he came home for breaks like summer or winter break, he would use the car at her home. But she surprised me by saying no, that he had the car with him on campus. Wait, that was not the answer I was expecting. Usually parents try to claim the kid never drives when they're home. This was heading in a completely different direction. I asked for clarification, so her son lived in the dorms but kept the car that he was driving with him on campus. She confirmed this and explained that he needed it for his job and to get around. I asked if the car was registered to him at the address of his campus. She said no, that the car was registered and insured by her in this state. I had to pause for a second. She was basically laying out a perfect case for why her policy should be cancelled, and she had no idea she was doing it. I repeated back what I understood, that even though he wasn't on the policy, he was still the primary driver and was keeping this car for most of the year at his college out of state. She confirmed that this was correct. I thanked her and told her that was all I needed to know, then hung up the phone. I just sat there for a minute staring at my notes. In all my years of doing this job, I'd never had someone hand me such a perfect setup. She had just admitted that her son was the primary driver of a vehicle that was garaged out of state for most of the year, but she was insuring it as if it stayed at her address in New Jersey. See, here's the thing about insurance that most people don't understand. Where your car is parked most of the time, what we call garaged, affects your rates because different areas have different risk levels. If you're insuring a car in suburban New Jersey, but it's actually spending most of its time on some college campus in another state, that's a problem. I filled out an underwriting referral right away. I was flagging this policy for review because the customer had just admitted that the primary usage location was different from what they were paying for. I explained the whole situation, how she insisted her son wasn't a resident of her household, which meant the car couldn't be considered garaged at her address either. About a week later, I got a call from her insurance agent asking if we could set up a conference call. She had received a letter saying her policy wasn't going to be renewed, and she was not happy about it. When we all got on the phone together, she was practically screaming. She kept saying it was ridiculous and that we didn't know what we were doing. The agent asked me to explain the situation to her. I explained that based on our previous conversation, she had said that her son was not a resident of her household since he lived at college most of the year. Following that logic, the vehicle he primarily drove also could not be considered garaged at her address since it was out of state for most of the year. This affected the risk calculation for her policy. She protested that wasn't what she meant. I told her I was just following the logic she had provided. She couldn't have it both ways. Either he was a resident who needed to be on her policy, or he wasn't a resident and the car wasn't garaged there. She hung up without another word. I could hear the click echo through the phone. After she left the call, the agent thanked me for handling the situation. He admitted that she had been his least favorite customer for years and that he was actually thrilled he wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. Since we reported the accident to the insurance database, every other company she tried to get coverage from would see that her son needed to be listed as a driver. She couldn't just shop around and hide the information anymore. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.